Hello, it's Phil Harvey here for Light Reading, and we are at the Fiber Connect conference in Nashville. And joining me right now is Dr. Holmes, Dr. Tamarah Holmes, Director of the Office of Broadband for the state of Virginia.
Yes.
And the Office of Broadband is a pretty common designation now, but this is a very recent sort of occurrence. When was the office formed in Virginia, and when were you appointed to that position?
Sure. So we actually were doing broadband way before we actually had an office in the Commonwealth. And so our office was officially created in September of 2019.
Okay.
Literally almost 4 or 5 months before the pandemic started in March of 2020.
Right. And so so tell us a little bit about what the office does and then what the BEAD program is. Specifically, we're kind of interested in how much funding has been distributed and what the results of that funding has been within the state.
Sure. So as I said earlier, we were doing broadband before it was cool.
Yeah.
So the Commonwealth actually, starting back in 2017, invested $1 million to do broadband last mile deployment. And so since 2017, and I'll kind of go through the iterations, we've gone from $1 million to $1 million to $4 million to $19 million to $50 million to $750 million.
Okay.
So in 5 years, we've scaled up our funding significantly. And as a result, in 2019, we established our Broadband Office. And so in addition to managing the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, which is our BEAD program,
right,
we also are in charge of, we developed and are maintaining our state broadband availability map, which we launched in April of last month actually.
Right.
Wait, we're in June. April 28th of 2020. And so we manage a state broadband map. We also have staff that provides planning support throughout the Commonwealth to all of our community partners who are interested in all things broadband. We just established a line extension customer assistance program. That's an additional pot of funding. It's about $16 million to help communities where we've got access within proximity to the home, but they have to pay additional money to get service to the home from the providers. So we have a small program.
Okay.
And
right.
So we also work with our community partners, our tribal communities, to access federal money. So we provide a lot of technical assistance. And then lastly, I have 3 engineers who are in-house who actually work with communities as they're developing applications with their private partners. And so BEAD is actually a public-private partnership, and it's not a public-private partnership in name only. Actually, our enabling language from the General Assembly says to supplement costs for the private sector to expand broadband in unserved areas. So that was a direction from our General Assembly, and we've been doing that since the inception of the program. And so since 2017, I wrote it down, we've invested over $797 million to get access to over 300,000 homes, businesses, and community anchors since 2017.
I like how comprehensive the overview of the access is, because a lot of the sort of jargon in the industry, they talk about fiber to homes passed or broadband homes passed, but that doesn't do it enough justice. It's like you have to get it the rest of the way to the home, and then once it's there, you have to make the applications accessible enough or usable enough or affordable enough for them to even participate in the broadband. So I'm glad that all aspects of that are being looked at. So how would you characterize the impact that it's had on the digital divide in the Commonwealth?
So as of our last investment, so we've made our largest investment in December 2021. And so we estimate, and just to put out there, our definition of unserved up until earlier this month was anything below 25/3.
Okay.
And so we actually just updated our definition to anything below 100/20.
Okay.
And so prior to that change in our guideline, we were looking at anything below 25/3. And so with our investments we've made through December of last year, we were looking at about 90% of the digital divide will be closed once all those projects are constructed. However, since we've changed our definition, it's increased the number of locations that will need service to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. And so we're looking at about Before the definition change, we were looking at about maybe 85,000 locations would still lack access. When we changed our definition, we're looking at a little over 200,000.
Okay, so it certainly widened the scope, but that's good in a way because it means you're going to address what people really need as opposed to the older definition.
Right.
So that's good. When we're speaking of funding, obviously there's the big talk about this conference, as it has been for maybe about a year now, is the federal funding coming in from the Broadband Infrastructure Program. Do you expect to participate in all the various elements of that, or how do you how would you characterize your state's participation in that incoming funding?
Okay. So like I said, we've had the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative that goes back to 2017. And so last summer, our previous governor awarded us $700 million in ARPA.
Okay.
And so that's the American Rescue Plan funding. And so our General Assembly split the pot and gave us a little bit over, less than $500 million in ARPA, and then we received $219 million in capital projects.
Okay.
And so in anticipation for the BEAD funding, we feel like we'll be able to continue doing the work we need to do to close the digital divide within Virginia with the new BEAD money. But the BEAD money also, I think, positions the Commonwealth to start looking at other aspects of broadband access. And so, there's multiple avenues to lack of access. There's lack of access due to lack of infrastructure, and then there's the lack of access due to affordability. And so Governor Youngkin recently signed legislation that was passed by our General Assembly that directs our agency to do a study around broadband affordability and cost effectiveness. So this will be the first time where we're really taking a chance to look at not only continuing to close the divide by access, but also looking at around affordability. And so we've been able to do some preliminary analysis of the money we've invested in December. And so I think national data shows that by megabit, Virginia was actually one of the third highest cost states per megabit. And so with our investments we made in December, we would move to one of the top 3 least expensive states with our most recent investments, I think behind Rhode Island.
How was that? Why was that change so drastic? I guess I don't understand the difference.
So part of it is the VADI program. We believe in a bottoms-up approach. So remember, our program is a public-private partnership. So units of local government, our counties, our planning districts, our regional organizations, our broadband authorities can come in for a grant, but they partner with a private ISP. Between our funding from the American Rescue Plan, our state general fund dollars, the local fiscal recovery money, and private investment, we're able to buy down the cost for last mile. In addition, our investor-owned utilities, Dominion Virginia Power and Appalachian Power, can have the ability to get permission they're building out fiber for their electric grids. They can actually get permission from their regulatory agency in the state to build middle mile, which they're already building for electric uses, to lease the excess fiber to last mile providers to expand broadband in unserved areas. So we've got a lot of initiatives and innovation around trying to buy down the costs for last mile deployment. And so our electric cooperatives are now internet service providers. The ones that are not, they're building out middle mile in support of their electric needs, but also can lease it for broadband. So we've got, and then Meta actually has done a project. I think they're around here somewhere. They've worked on a project with one of our small ISPs in Grayson County, which they've been playing a video at the conference, where we had a small internet service provider based out of West Virginia, came into Virginia in 2017, did a couple of small cell wireless projects, and now that company is working to build an entire county out, all unserved areas, with fiber in partnership with Appalachian Power and Meta. And so what that provider said to me, he said it completely changes his business model because now as a small provider, he's able to have access to Appalachian suppliers, Meta suppliers, engineering resources, and so all the things that increase the cost of broadband are able to be minimized by these partnerships.
Right, and every foot you cut out of the equation, from the middle mile to the end of the line, you're saving thousands of dollars, per foot, per person, per mile. Every time I talk to CEOs and fiber providers and some of the technology companies that are here, they are very bullish on fiber, rightly so, and a lot of the programs that are funneling the money to the states are prioritizing fiber. I assume you don't have a problem with that, but do you agree with that approach in general?
So in Virginia, we are technology agnostic. So remember, I have state general fund dollars. So while the ARPA funding and capital project funding and the forthcoming BEAD money kind of favors fiber in Virginia, remember, we're doing a bottoms-up approach, so it's really our communities that are helping to identify how best to meet their needs. And if there's a provider that's going to do fiber, if there's a provider that's going to do hybrid coax cable, if there's a provider that's going to do wireless, if all those solutions are needed to address a community's lack of access, we will support any one of the technologies. And so to give you an example, in Roanoke County, Virginia, they came in the last round of our funding cycle, and so they actually received money for a fiber build, a coax build, and a wireless build, and at the end of all those projects, they'll be able to have more than 98% of their residents will have access to broadband. And we're talking about some of the most high-cost areas. It's mountainous, there are valleys, hills, mountains all through Roanoke County, and they'll have coverage for almost 98% of their residents and locations will have access at the end of the projects.
Interesting. I'm fascinated with how you do your job a little bit because you know, my colleagues know I can't order lunch without significant help. But how do you involve all of the stakeholders in these communities, and also kind of, because there's so many different funding sources, kind of hold them accountable, you know, as the process goes along? Because you all, you know, in general, you're all agreeing on principle, but it just seems like working with so many communities that need help, and then also you've got so many funding sources that somewhere along the way people are going to, you know, roam off the path, so to speak.
So because our office was established, actually, it's really funny because it started in 2019, right? And so right before COVID. And ironically, we're one of the oldest broadband offices in the country if you talk to the other states. And so during the pandemic, while everyone else was kind of like trying to figure out how they were going to react, we as a state were already making investments in broadband last mile. And so in terms of office capacity, I have 13 positions, of which 12 are full. And so I had complete latitude in developing my staff, and as a result, the support we're able to give the communities is we have a lot of capacity. So my very first hire was an engineer that came from the industry, and that's because our industry stakeholders said, "You're the government, you don't know what you're doing. You need to stay in your lane." And I took that to heart, and I said, we need to figure out how to bring in engineers so that we can, it's not apples and oranges, it's apples and apples. And not only does it give us the capacity to be able to manage projects and fund projects and understand the proposals, but it also gives our communities technical assistance around what are your private provider partners wanting to do in your communities. Is it feasible? Is it realistic? Because these engineers, I have 3 of them on staff, have the technical expertise. I know enough to be dangerous as a broadband director. I can teach engineers how to manage grants. What I can't teach is myself how to be an engineer. And so our first hiring was an engineer, and then the next big hire were GIS technicians, because you can't plan to build unserved areas if you don't know where they are. And so build out the staffing to do planning. And so I have staff who actually reach out to every single locality in Virginia every year to find out what they want to do around broadband, whether they're even thinking about it, and then help forge those partnerships within the private sector community. So I like to joke and say I did a lot of Match.com relationship building between ISPs and communities. And so in terms of all the additional federal money, under the last presidential administration, we have 13 federal tribes in Virginia. 7 received federal recognition, literally in the middle of a pandemic. And so we provide a lot of technical assistance, not just about our funding, but about the tribal communities being able to go get the NTIA funding. Several of our communities applied directly to NTIA for their competitive program. We have several folks looking at the middle mile NTIA program. So we provide technical assistance, not just in what we do, but also on the federal resources as well.
I have one more question, and then I'll leave you alone. The FCC is going to release, or is expected to release this fall, some new data on broadband mapping. To what degree do you contribute to their understanding of where the needs are, what the maps look like, and that sort of thing? Is that a process you're actively involved in, or are you sort of waiting for the data to come out and then you respond to it?
So, ironically, March of 2021, our General Assembly put money in the budget for us to build a Virginia broadband availability map. We previously had a map, and the map only took the FCC Form 77 data, and just took the Virginia data and mapped it.
Just mapped
and
it.
so with the legislation budget that was passed in March of 2021, it directed us to build a new state broadband availability map, and it's location-based data. And so it charges our internet service providers in Virginia to give us their location-based data directly, and then we're able to map it, of course not by address, but in an aggregate form.
Right.
And so it's tied directly in the legislation to the Broadband Data Act that was passed by Congress, I think in 2020. And then all of our guidance is based on the FCC's third order, which is the order that they developed to develop their map.
Okay.
And so that was a compromise between our legislators and the industry folks. And so we get the data directly from providers in Virginia, and so we map the data, and we just issued our map in April of 2022. And so I think, I know for a fact that because our map is tied directly to all the things the FCC had forthcoming in terms of developing their map for this fall, our Virginia providers are ready to submit their data to the FCC. We have about a 98% submission rate in Virginia to our data, and so we know that those providers are positioned to submit to the FCC. I do have some concerns that some of our smaller providers may not be positioned, but they've kind of been guinea pigs as we built out our maps, how to prepare them for the FCC map. And so we already have our data, and so I'm hoping that once the FCC publishes their data, in the event that we do have to challenge, we'll have Virginia-based data to share, and that it also will help us be a lot more strategic in our investments, because one, we collected data, they're going to collect data. There should be no discrepancies between the data we got in and the data that they'll get, because it positions us to, one, it's our funding for BEAD is tied to that data, right? That's going to come out for the FCC map. And so we want to make sure that as we've been good stewards of the money we've already had, that as the money comes from NTIA, that we'll continue to not only invest in last mile, but also the other components of BEAD, such as the governor directed us to develop a broadband affordability and cost effectiveness plan around federal resources. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to develop this plan, utilize not only our state data, but also the forthcoming FCC data. So I'm optimistic for Virginia's data. I am concerned a little bit about the scale, because each state is so different, and so many of us have maps that have been developed, and so we did submit our letter to the FCC, I guess in the last couple of weeks, where we wanted to be in a position to have a conversation with them about the data collection process, our data that we've gotten in, so that we can have the best data possible for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, that's great. I share your concern about the rest of the nation, because I'm not so sure that some states have been quite as proactive in terms of working with the providers down the line. But I guess that's what we'll wait and see how that turns out, and then maybe that'll be a great excuse to have you back on, Light Reading or Broadband World News podcast. Thanks so much for your time today,
All right,
Dr. Holmes.
Thank you.